Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Andrew Miller, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about complete context, the foundation for AI that actually works. And our sponsors today are Databricks and Skan AI. For our presentations today, we'll hear first from Prashant Suthakal with TDWI. And after Prashant speaks, we'll be joined by Vasu Gupta with Databricks and Dan Dantis with Skan AI for presentations and a panel discussion. Before I turn over the time to our speakers, please allow me to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long, and at the end of their presentations, our speakers will host a question and answer period. So if at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can click on the Technical FAQs area and you'll receive technical assistance. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, you can locate the resource window to download the PDF. Lastly, we are recording today's event and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you'd like, or you can share with a colleague. Again, today we're going to be discussing complete context, the foundation for AI that actually works. And our first speaker is Prashant Suthakal. He's a research fellow at TDWI and managing principal of DBP Institute and D2A2. Prashant is a data analytics and AI consultant, author, and professor. He has consulted for over 80 organizations, including P&G, GE, Shell, Apple, Whirlpool, and SAP. He is the author of 3 books, Data for Business Performance, Analytics Best Practices, and Data Quality. He has trained over 4,500 professionals worldwide in data analytics and AI. And Prashant also an adjunct professor of data and analytics at IE Business School in Madrid, Spain. He holds a PhD from ESC Lille in France, an MBA from Kellogg School of Management in the United States, and an ICDD designation from Rotman School of Management in Canada. With that, please welcome Prashant, and I will hand it over to you now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Andrew, for the nice introduction. Welcome, everybody. And before we get into the core of this topic on related to context engineering, let me give you guys a quick context or an introduction about AI in the world of analytics as well, because AI has typically evolved from the area of analytics. So overall, when we talk about analytics, it's all about using data to derive insights for decision making. And most of you would be knowing, if you look at the Gartner's model, we have 4 major types of analytics. Descriptive, what happened; diagnostic, why it happened; predictive, what will happen in the future; and prescriptive, what are the factors or the independent variables which will cause a particular event to happen. So from this, you get the insights. And those insights are the ones which are used for making decisions and using those decisions for actions and outcomes. That's where AI comes into the picture, which is the right side of this picture, which works on rules which are derived from insights for taking appropriate action. And when you talk about actions, these actions follow a particular phase. First, you formulate the rules, then you standardize the rules to have automation. Because most of us know when you talk about automation, they work only when you have standardization. And from those automated rules, you work on optimization. So the common element which connects analytics and AI, apart from many things, in the context of this presentation, is the data platforms. You need a very solid data which works for analytics to derive those insights so that you can apply in the world of AI. So if you look at the whole journey of how AI has come, you can look at it from different angles. And one of the angles to look at it is from a technology perspective. So we have the scheduled jobs. So we all know that we have the night jobs, which we have in the IT world, which run overnight, which run at predefined times without practically any human intervention. And from there, we have the world of RPA, robotic process automation, which kind of mimic human actions so that we automate repetitive and rule-based processes. And now we are talking about agents, which are autonomous software entities that perceive, reason, and act in a dynamic environment. So my colleague from D2A2, Tobias Wingman, has written this book on Profitable AI Advantage. So if you're interested, you can know more about this. But overall, this is where the intelligent automation roadmap is actually evolving. We started with scheduled jobs, RPA, and ultimately we are in the world of AI agents. So what specifically are this AI agents? So it's basically a software system that perceives its environments to make decisions using data and AI models, sometimes using even HTIL, which is human in the loop, to make action to achieve the specific objectives. So in the business setting or in the enterprise setting, they are used to automate workflows, analyze business processes, and execute tasks across multiple IT systems while adapting the business context. So research by Stanford professors have shown that AI agents can increase productivity by up to 60% when the data and the processes are aligned. So things are very promising, provided the data and processes are aligned. So it all looks great. So we want to do AI agents. However, it is not very rosy. There are so many initial instances where AI projects are not being very successful. MIT did a study, Gartner did a study, and all those things. So most of the studies have shown that the AI agents primarily fail because the AI that is deployed is either broken or it's not poorly understood the process and workflows. So overall, these agents can't fix what they cannot see. So that's process visibility is one of the key elements to make this happen. So how does this work? So you have a technical architecture of the AI agents with many components here. So technically, when you talk about the AI agents, it's centered on structured collaboration between the users who are there, the reasoning models, the tools, the memory so that you can execute systems which are scalable and versatile. So it all starts with the prompt. The prompt ingestion captures the user's interaction using an appropriate prompt template. Once the prompt has been received, it goes to the LLM engine where the context is actually coming from the data. This could be both structured data or the unstructured, which could be text, audio, video, and images. So once you have this context coming into the picture to the LLM tools, you have many tools which enable actions such as calling the APIs, performing computations, or getting even external data from third-party applications that extend below to make it all happen. Then you have the memory, which works along with the tools, which stores relevant information, preferences, history, so that the model can capture the context dynamically during reasoning, ensuring coherent and personalized output. So overall, when we talk about the technical architecture of AI agents, is basically you have this user input, then you have the structured prompt, which is coming from the prompt templates, then we have the LLM models, which are mainly about reasoning, then we have the tool execution, and ultimately you have the memory update to get the right actions. So technically, this is how the AI agent architecture looks like. But from the context perspective, when we look at how this all comes into the picture, so you have three major elements. It all starts with your objectives. Why are we doing this? So when we talk about context, which is required, it's a combination of three main things. You have your purpose, you have your goals, you have your rules which are coming, then you have your insights, which are actually coming from the analytics world. So rules plus insights, which are derived from analytics, are the ones which are driving the AI agents. So what is the main gap which we have here? The main gap is basically, as I said earlier, is about the context. So we need a good understanding of the context so that we can design and build the AI agents appropriately. So why does context matter? Because if you look at the history, the enterprise agents today are primarily built on BI data, which is basically structured data, which we have zero-party data, first party, second party, third party, and so on, along with the system logs and everything. But this BI data often lacks process dependencies, user-level interaction, how the decisions have been made, cross-functional dependencies, or even system dependencies. Because if you don't have the right context, the AI agents can hallucinate the workflows, the process steps, the automation phase in extreme cases, the edge cases, which we talk about, and governance and the fixing of this problem becomes very reactive. So that's why context makes such a big thing. So if you look at the AI agents with context and without context, if you look at different dimensions here, whether it's memory, personalization, accuracy, complexity, and the data requirements, there are different parameters where without context and with context, the AI agents work. So when you talk about memory, for example, without context, each request is treated independently, whereas with context, it remembers the previous state, previous interaction. Personalization without context, the same response, whereas if you put context into the system, we have seen that each of the response is tailored to the previous history. We have seen it in most of the LLM tools, including like ChatGPT, for example. Accuracy, without context, more ambiguity, higher risk. With context, there is better interpretation, improved decision quality, so on and so forth. Complexity, without context, simple system design, but with context, requires additional components, data pipelines, memory, so on and so forth. And data requirements without context is very minimal, whereas here it's going to be significant. It requires structured data, unstructured data, historical, environmental, so on and so forth. So what does this AI-ready data look like? So we all want to get AI-ready data so that we can deploy our agents successfully. So overall, we talk about 4 key elements that make that data ready. So when I talk to my clients and prospects, they all say, hey, we want AI-ready data. But most of them have carried this BI data, which they are used for reports and dashboards. But what does this AI-ready data look like in today's AI world? So the first one is about transactions. You have actions only when there is transaction. Just like you have 500,000 customer records, doesn't mean that you're doing business with half of them. Transactions are the ones which are driving actions. They have a relationship with the counterparties. The first one that matters is what are the transactions which you are talking about? What are the elements which hits the general ledger? That's number one. Number 2, context, which is all about the contextual data, the process information, the user data, environment data, metadata, relationships with the AI context, and so on. So it's all about the context, about location, person, so on and so forth. The third element is about the governance, data pertaining to processes, your policies, your security and privacy data, even including experimentation work which you have done, so on and so forth. And lastly, unbiased data. Make sure that the data is enough so that it is balanced, it's representative of the whole population which is there, diverse across different user needs, scenarios, and even edge cases. So this is what I call it as AI-ready data. How do we transition from BI to AI? These are the 4 key elements that really matter. So technology, how do you make it happen? You start with the workflow. That's the main goal. You don't start with the technology. You start with the process. You start with your objective. That's number 1. From there, you go to the rules. You identify what are the insights that are required. From there, you build the data infrastructure, the orchestration of the whole process, and ultimately, you have the solutions that make it happen. Most companies have seen start with infrastructure, model, and apps. That's what they typically start with. But that's extremely risky. What I would advise my clients is start with your objectives, start with your workflow or processes, then go to rules, then go to decisions, and then ultimately you have your outcomes. There is a classic article in IEEE which says there is no AI without IA. There is no artificial intelligence without information architecture. That means you can talk about AI, but if you don't have the right AI agent stack, you are not going very far with your AI solutions. So that's it from me. So this is one of my quotes at MIT Sloan Management Review book, article which says that you might have a lot of data, but if you don't know how to use it, you are not going very far with your analytics and AI solutions. So that's it from me. I will pass over to Andrew. Andrew, over to you, sir. And I'm here for any questions or thoughts. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you so much, Prashant. That was a great presentation there. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker today, Dan Dantas with Skan AI. Dan is the Vice President of Agentic AI Solutions at Skan AI, where he leads go-to-market strategy for the company's Agentic AI Solutions. With a career spanning Boston Consulting Group, BlinkRx, and Jewel Labs, Dan is focused on how AI can drive real operational outcomes at enterprise scale. With that, please welcome Dan, and I will hand it over to you now.
Thanks for joining. Want to just talk briefly about how we approach this context challenge at Skan AI. Very, very briefly to just credentialize our business. Skan AI really focuses on the large, heavily regulated enterprise. We're very focused on 3 verticals in particular, although of course we have customers outside of these, but very focused on financial services, insurance, and healthcare. And really what we do is focus on bringing context out of particularly large and complex workflows, often where you have thousands of operators and there's very high stakes, where trust and quality are really priorities 1, 2, and 3. I'd like to just highlight the numbers on the right-hand side of the page because with many things now with LLMs, there's kind of a notion of compounding intelligence, right? And so as we think about what our job is, which is really to bring context from these very complex workflows, really the more of these workflows you see, the more diversity that you see, frankly, the better you are at being able to derive ontology from these processes to perform process discovery. And so each of our customers really benefits from this scale. The challenges that we look to solve, there's many challenges really to implementing and scaling agents, but we're very focused with our technology on the context challenge. And the way I really like to boil that down is, number one, most of these large complex business processes don't have an SOP today that's detailed enough to govern that work. And then alongside that, these processes don't have automated and scaled QA of work. So typically a very, very small portion of these cases are ever QA'd, typically far less than 1%, often for trainees or for audit purposes. But there's no sort of scaled QA. And so if you think about these challenges in the context of integrating agents, it is very challenging to give an agent an end-to-end workflow to do, regardless of how strong the model is, if you cannot give it sufficiently detailed instructions around what its objective is and how it should accomplish that. And then if you do integrate that agent, it is very, very challenging to know if the agent's actually doing the right thing if you're not thinking sort of eval first, and really how are you going to at scale QA not only the actions but also the judgments that the agent is making once in that environment. So these are really the two challenges that we think of and what we focus on. The way that we do that is we start from observation data. So we've sort of spent years building the technology that allows us to observe thousands of operators within a business, and we're talking about direct screen observation as well as metadata capture, and from that to derive what is the ontology of the work that's happening. So in human language, right? How do you describe the work that's happening in great detail, and then to disambiguate what's happening on the ground floor at the event level. To what are the activities, to what are the tasks, to what are the steps, to what are the sub-processes and the processes. So ultimately you can understand a workflow truly end-to-end. That's what we focus, and this is the data that we bring into our agentic pipeline. Our agentic pipeline and how we support our customers in launching these end-to-end workflow agents is really a four-step process. Again, we start from that telemetry data. We then have a pipeline that trains on thousands of observed historical cases and really identifies what are the process steps, what are the decision points and the logic that governs those decision points, and what are the action steps for actually how to take action on those judgments within your environment. And so again, we use our telemetry data to really develop what we call an agent operating procedure, working off of your sort of existing, human operator performance from the past, and then we actually test our agent operating procedure against that same telemetry. So typically we reserve 10-15% of cases for actually testing and refining the agent. So we'll literally ask our agent, how would you handle this case that happened in the past? We'll compare how it did it relative to a human operator, and actually validate with very specific data and confidence that our agent performs those tasks higher accuracy than human operators do. Once we're there, we assemble the agent, we give it tool use to work in your environment, we incorporate the appropriate escalations and guardrails. And then simulation, evaluation, and sort of course continuous monitoring happens within our platform. So this is really the four-step approach that we take, and typically we look to develop and deploy workflow agents that can take we target $1 to $2 million at a minimum of business value, and we're shipping typically 1 to 3 months. And so we get into a cadence with our customers, and so really the question that I'd be thinking about is sort of how do you create the right context engine so that you can sort of scale your agentic ambitions across the areas within your organization where you have opportunity. This is just one very, very quick example of an agent that we deployed. This actually took us about 6 to 8 weeks to build, and during that time we took about 10 to 15% of an operator's workflow. This agent handles about 40 discrete actions and is representative of somewhere in the range of about $5 million of work for this business. But this is what is possible today, really in particular in the last 3 months. 3 to 6 months, really, with the advancement, the continued advancement in LLMs. These results are being shipped today. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the upcoming panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Dan, for that great presentation. And please now allow me to introduce our next guest speaker today, Vasu Gupta with Databricks. Vasu is a field engineering leader in the financial services vertical at Databricks, where she leads teams focused on new customer acquisition and partners with leading organizations to adopt the Databricks Data Intelligence Platform. She brings over 16 years of experience driving enterprise growth through cloud adoption, data, and AI. Prior to Databricks, Vasu held leadership roles at Google, Slalom, and Deloitte. Her expertise spans the full customer lifecycle, including pre-sales, post-sales, partner management, and cloud platform strategy, with a strong track record of enabling hypergrowth. With that, welcome, Vasu, and I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for joining, everybody. Extremely excited to be here. So, we heard a lot about kind of this context-ready data from both Prashant as well as Dan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you make this context-ready data available, and the solution to that is a strong data foundation. But before I talk about the data foundation and our architecture a little bit, just again credentializing who we are as a company. If you've heard of the concept of lakehouse, if there's a big kind of paradigm shift in the industry, we are the inventors of that lakehouse paradigm. Pretty much every, I would say, Fortune 250 company is looking at this paradigm on how they're storing their data within the lakehouse. We are also a big proponent of an open source ecosystem. The founders of Spark, Apache Spark, Iceberg, they're all part of the Databricks ecosystem. And if you look at the numbers on the left, actually now we're over 5 billion in revenue and supporting over 15,000 customers. I personally, as Andrew mentioned in the introduction, lead our financial services field engineering team and work with some marquee global customers, Fortune 250 customers. And again, I'll share a couple of those customer case stories as we go through this presentation. So with that, if we sort of take a step back and, we want to deliver, this context-ready data, we want to deliver meaningful insights, we want to be able to action as we are developing these agents. But the reality is, especially if you look at the legacy companies, the data and AI estate is pretty fragmented. I can say that for financial services, I work with a lot of legacy banks and insurance companies, and you've got this, data estate that is sitting in. You could have data warehousing applications. We're building, obviously, the generative AI applications. You've got your data science applications. You've got so much data sitting in operational databases like transactional databases. So it is a pretty fragmented system out there, and there's a lot of lock-in from both an operational data standpoint as well as the analytical data standpoint. And if you look at all of these applications, whether it's databases, data science, BI, SaaS applications, each of them have their own kind of governance postures, right? The security policies are pretty niche to each of these applications. And now with the advent of agents, there's a massive amount of AI sprawl. Everybody wants to create agents, but how do you have them working on a governed data system is super important. So again, the system is pretty fragmented, and this is exactly the problem that Databricks sort of really hopes to solve with the capabilities that we have to offer. So before we think about really building those contextual ready data sets and building agents that can action those contextual ready data sets, it's the first step in this, call it like essentially a three-layered cake, if you will. The first step is establishing a common data foundation. So as I mentioned, Databricks is very much about open formats, cloud agnostic. And we pioneered what we call the Delta Lake, which is a proprietary open source format, Apache, again, Iceberg, which is pretty widely adopted in the industry. So having that common open data format layer that can go across all these systems and applications is step number one. Then the next piece of that layered cake is really building a unified governance layer. And we do that with something called Unity Catalog. And I think in traditional sense, the governance has always been thought of in the context of structured data. So your tables, columns. But when referring to governance here, I'm not talking about just structured data, but I'm also talking about unstructured data. I'm talking about the models. I'm talking about the agents. I'm talking about all of that vast information, whether structured, unstructured, models, AI, all getting unified through that unified governance layer. So you're really abstracting it versus it living in each of those systems. And then once you've got those, the third piece of this core data platform is the capabilities that we as a company have built on top of, providing, whether it's data warehousing capabilities. We recently launched something called Lakebase, which is more on the transactional side, so your serverless Postgres. And then again, your ETL capabilities, where you're really munging the data together, surfacing insights, whether it's batch processing or streaming processing. So again, that open formats, the unified governance, and then the core capabilities to be able to collect all data sets, do different things with it, ask information, that essentially makes your core data platform. And that's the foundation. So once you have that foundation, now you're really talking about, okay, how do I deliver enterprise context on this data, and how do I bring those capabilities that we've just, you heard Prashant talk about, you heard Dan talk about, and bring them to this data. And the way we think about this within, sort of our world is, you'll hear a lot something called Genie, which is really making relationships of the data. So now that I have all this data available in a common data foundation, now I can truly ask questions. And in our case, it's something called Genie, and there's lots of ability to do that outside with different tools and technologies. And this tool particularly is basically asking questions of the data, making the relationships, who, which team, what policy, and essentially providing those insights back to be able to make meaningful context. And once you have this available, now you can really build those production-grade AI systems as value-added systems, whether it's agentic BI capabilities or it's production-grade AI systems. And I think what better, I would say, customer story than really the power of Skan and Databricks together, right? Like, again, that from a Skan perspective, all that work that's happening on the process side, the workflow side, the capturing of user behavior, the billions of workflow signals that you're essentially capturing through those rules, through those processes. How do you essentially have them together in one place, whether it's real-time information, whether it's historical information, and how do you govern all that data? Unified governance, how do you track that data? Where is it coming from? How do you audit that information? Who has access to all of that? And then that is what essentially powers those contextual data sets, and then that subsequently trains those AI agents. So that's where Databricks comes in. So Skan captures that context, Databricks acts as that orchestration layer, or that unified, I would say, data and AI layer. And the idea of that joint really business value that you're providing back to the customer is you've got information that is trustworthy, that is reliable, that is governed, that has the right safety guardrails. And again, especially in regulated institutions like financial services and healthcare, that auditability and lineage is super important. So again, this is one example. I work in the financial services space, and this is Databricks essentially acts as that unified data and AI layer, and how we are making sure that the context-ready data sets that we are providing essentially can be audited, right? Like people can, the biggest gap we see in the industry is the ability to trust the information that's coming from the agent, and that's where we come in. So with that, I'll hand it back to Andrew.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vasu. And now it is time for our panel discussion. So I'll ask that Dan and Prashant rejoin us. And Prashant, I will pass it over to you to begin the discussion.
Thanks, Andrew, and great presentation, Dan and Vasul. Loved it. I'll start first with Dan. Dan, I like the word which you used, compounding intelligence, and also the four-phase framework. But my question to you is, when companies or enterprises have so many workflows, or hundreds or thousands of workflows that they could potentially automate with AI agents, what is the starting point? Where should they start with?
Yeah, absolutely. A few thoughts from our end. The first would be really to have clarity around your what's driving your business case. And so typically that's either an OpEx related business case or a quality related business case. You want to do things cheaper or you want to do things higher quality. But there can be other key drivers of a business and why you'd want to focus on agents. So I think the first thing is really being very, very clear on what's driving the business case. The second thing I would do then is basically go after basically a meaty opportunity, right? And the right criteria for this, typically, for example, if it's an OpEx related use case, you need to go somewhere where you have a corpus of individuals, right? Where you have 100,000 or more individuals working on something, where you have a real OpEx opportunity, and you have to think end to end, right? So how can I prove something that is not only going to maybe automate a task, but it's actually going to lead to a more transformative impact, right? So tens of points of impact. If you have a quality use case, same thing, right? Where can I find somewhere in the organization where the quality of a decision or a quality of piece of work is highly important and also complex, so that ultimately I can prove one, that we can satisfy the business case, and two, that this is basically a scalable capability. So if you can have clarity on the overall business case and prove that you have a capability that's scalable, then typically you can grow behind that. What I find is that a lot of the challenge comes, if you're just basically trying to do agents for the sake of agents, and you do work basically outside of something that's kind of really driving the core of what's most important for your business.
Yeah, love it. In my experience, what I have seen is there's so much of emphasis on the benefits of AI, but companies also have to think about the opportunities that they are losing by not looking at agents and the AI solution. So one thing is good to talk about benefits, but also spend some time on what you're going to lose by not doing it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Vasu, I loved your presentation on the common data platform, which you guys are pioneering these days. But I spoke about the AI-ready data, where I spoke about different components, the 4 different elements. But most of the clients have got, most of the companies have got challenges in integrating or unifying all this diverse data set. You mentioned about structured data, then we have lots of unstructured data coming in diverse formats at different time intervals and everything. So how does a platform like Databricks help enterprises in unifying various data sources so that we get context-ready data, which Dan is talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, number one, I remember the 4 sort of quadrants that you mentioned, right, on the context-ready data. Like, just for me, context-ready data, like, it's unified data, like you said, structured, unstructured, streaming signals, everything at one place. The enrichment of data, the ability to, hey, I've got all this raw data, I want to enhance it with the business context. The governance of that data, which is like, hey, lineage tracking, access, and all of that, and also the freshness of the data, right? Like, again, these days with the AI context-ready data, it's not just about the historical time signals. I think you had mentioned that as well. It's about the real-time streaming. So if you sort of take all those parameters in place and kind of think about how Databricks does this, it comes down to the lakehouse architecture, right? And the common paradigm is basically the idea of eliminating the data silos, right? Whether you've got your streaming data sets, whether you've got your batch data sets, everything is kind of coming in sort of one common platform layer, like I mentioned, right? Like the 3-layer, I'll go back to the 3-layered cake. And that governance, whether you're thinking of these streaming data sets versus the batch data sets, it's all governed through that Unity catalog, which is essentially that common kind of lineage and governance and access control layer. Now, if you look at traditional systems and how people used to do it before, like the legacy data warehousing, right? There was this idea of data warehousing, which is very much for your OLTP system, or OLAP systems. And then you had this notion of data lake, where when people were building kind of machine learning applications, they would put the raw data in, and then you're munging the data to actually surface it for AI models. We sort of unified that together, where it's kind of one landing layer, where you're bringing the world of OLAP, I would say OLTP as well, now with Lakebase, where we are kind of bringing the Postgres world together as well. And again, thinking of that all in one layer. So whether it's your BI application, whether it's your agentic applications, whether it's your machine learning applications, all of that can be developed. And I think the perfect example that I want to give, in the world of really context-ready data is FactSet. I mean, I'm in financial services, so I'll use FactSet as an example. If you think about data as a marketplace, right? FactSet is a data provider providing data sets on the marketplace. Before, it was like, okay, they had these data sets on the marketplace, which people were using, and then they were kind of, again, doing data munging, maybe creating a BI application, maybe creating an AI model. Now they've shifted the approach, right? They're providing vectorized data sets on the marketplace, the Databricks marketplace. And you talked about this concept of tools and memory, right? Like, and everybody's heard of MCP servers. They're hosting an MCP server on the Databricks marketplace. So the idea of this contextual ready data set, where, hey, now I can basically leverage this vectorized data sets. And again, the power underneath all of it is still, you want it to be governed data set, you want it to be trusted data set, you want it to be coming from a place where it's auditable. Databricks is doing that, sort of plumbing all of it for you. But from an end consumer perspective, now they're getting this rich data set that is pretty much ready to be used for AI agentic applications, because it's not just static data sets, they actually have reasoning and context behind them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. Great one. Like transactionally, when you talk about integrating OLTP and OLAP, so you have a system where you can run the business as understand the business in one platform. Yeah. Okay, good. So I'll connect the question which I asked to Dan and to you, Vasu, and bring both of you together. So Dan, you mentioned about context data, and Vasu, you mentioned about unifying various data sets. So how can organizations connect both of them together and move beyond insights to executing real business outcomes with AI agents? I'll start first with Dan. Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and really, what we think about and what we believe the answer is how you make your business processes essentially AI ready data, right? So picture, the example that Vasu just gave, where you can plug into FactSet in an AI ready way. Like, imagine if you could plug your AI into your business process the same way you plug into FactSet, right? And get those AI ready signals. That's what we really focus on enabling for our customers, because when you can plug into your business process in an AI ready way, it can then work very well with your data sources and your applications, and allow you ultimately to execute your business processes. So that's our approach, but I'd love to hear, Vasu, your thoughts on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved how you tied it back to the FactSet example. Maybe I'll kind of build upon it, right? I think we all know, right? Like, everybody's trying to build agents out there, and if you whether it's a McKinsey study you look at, or so many studies that are out there, only a very small percentage of these agents are actually getting deployed in production, right? So yes, the insights are there, but again, to your point, like tying it back to the business workflow and actually an agent doing something, right? Like, I think a great, in our world, like, we have Salesforce, and we are now starting to tell people that the agent can actually go in and update the data in Salesforce. You don't actually have to manually go do it. But the bridging of that gap from just doing the insights to actually taking action, I feel like is a trust factor again, right? Do we trust this AI agent to act on our behalf? Does it have access to the right information? Is it hallucinating, right? Does it have the right safety guardrails in place? Is it auditable? And I think, again, if you think about it in those dimensions, and if you have the right, almost like breadbox boundaries, I think that's where organizations are being successful. I think, Skan's a great example, right? Like in being able to actually integrate it in workflows and processes. I think if organizations are able to bridge that trust gap, that is where it's not just insights, but it's actually reliable business actions. And again, I think there are some organizations that have done it really well, but the percentage of those organizations are small because there's so much of skepticism still out there because of maybe lack of auditability or lack of these guardrails or the lack of agents having access to the right systems, the ground truth, all of those. So I think, again, building those kind of the bread box is super important in order to be able to integrate them in the business processes.
Fully agree.
Excellent. Love it. Great answers, Dan and Vasu. So, Dan, you were saying something?
Yeah. Prasanta, and I wanted to jump in here for with a question for you. So, look, in your presentation, you talked about how context comes from rules, insights, and objectives. So, in practice, how should organizations operationalize and maintain this context layer as these processes, policies, and data evolve over time?
Yeah. So, Dan, I'll just build on your slide where you talked about the 4-step process: observe, model, assemble, and run. I'll just build on that. So, as I said, context, in my experience, what I've seen is it is what is being relevant to the objective which you are trying to solve here. And that context or relevance comes from factors such as time, such as location, the user profiles, the reference data categories like the account groups, the payment terms, and all those things. So the context is the one which comes from different elements, which makes the whole agent relevant. So when you talk about agents being relevant over a period of time, so that's where platforms such as Databricks and the context engine which you guys have come into the picture. So, for example, I would start first with your objectives. Again, my first question to you: when you have so many workflows, where do you start? Which is your objective? Which is, are you talking about resolving a support ticket quickly? Are you talking about policy renewal when you talk about insurance? Are you talking about optimizing inventory? All those things. We start with your objectives. Then from those objectives, you know what insights you need, and that come from the unified data platform, such as what Vasu was talking about, both structured and unstructured data. Given that today we have almost like 80 to 90% of the data in a typical enterprise being unstructured, so the insights which are derived from data also play a very big role. And then you have those rules and constraints, including ethical aspects, which help the AI define the solution under the regulations, the organization policies, constraints, and everything. So overall, that's what I would say. 3 main things: making sure that your agent is relevant based on all those factors, plus looking at the objectives, insights, and the rules. So, yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
I don't know whether we have more time. So, Andrew, do you have a couple of minutes? I have a few more questions for Dan and Vasu. How many minutes do you have?
Yeah, I think we can take this for another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, good. Then I have a question for Dan. Back to you.
Yeah.
So given that the speed in which the AI capabilities and all this infrastructure is evolving, how can organizations prioritize their effort and all their initiatives so that they have a lasting impact and don't build the AI debt, which has been discussed now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one thing we can count on for absolutely certain, right, is that what we're able to do in 12 months is going to be very different than what we're able to do now, if the next 12 months are anything like the last 12 months. So that we can be very certain of. We feel very confident that investment in building your context layer again is not only valuable in the near term, but actually becomes more valuable as the capabilities of LLMs continue to grow, right? And so we work with our customers to really build that context layer. And then the other thing I would sort of add on top of that is, we strongly recommend our customers, not to focus on what's sometimes called the Swiss cheese approach, right? Which is, getting trapped a little bit in the old way of thinking. We have a repetitive motion here, or we have something very simple and explainable there. So let's just bring automation because we can get some kind of quick and short wins, right? Those sorts of behaviors do not compound in benefit over time. However, if you start to think about, hey, how can I actually make an end-to-end automation that really relies on understanding the context. Frankly, even if it takes you a little bit longer, even if you fail at your first go, you're going to be building that context that's going to be valuable to you as the capabilities improve over time. So it's really that mindset of, again, thinking about how can you make the sort of like, end-to-end investment that's ultimately going to satisfy your business goal, and then really centering your investment around building that context layer, which will enable you to do certain things today and then even more in 12 months.
Excellent, excellent. So Vasu, you mentioned about the unifying the data platforms when we had that earlier discussions. So to have this unified data platform, the data pipelines play a big role in getting this data from diverse sources, the OLTP systems, it could be even spreadsheets for that matter. So how can organizations architect their data pipelines so that these agents can access get those data and, of course, the insights in kind of near real time?
Yeah, absolutely. At the risk of sounding maybe too technical here, but I think to be honest, like I think the industry and the capabilities have definitely moved where we are thinking of everything in terms of like a stream first architecture, right? And what I mean by that again is, there's a lot of capabilities, and again, don't want to go too technical, but like, structured streaming is a capability. I mean, I'm a common term in the industry of something called the change data capture, where you can really let the agents reason on maybe things that have changed from the last time things happen. So in our world, they're really, whether you're building a streaming pipeline or you're building essentially a batch pipeline, the capabilities are very homogeneous. It's not like you're writing two different languages or anything like that. It's a very, I would say, homogeneous system where it's become very easy for people to be able to ingest that real-time data so that the agents are not actioning on, last night's information, but they can get that real-time context that you're talking about. And I think one great paradigm in the industry to think about is this idea of a medallion architecture, where you got your raw data, which is kind of your bronze layer, right? So you got all, whether it's the raw data landing without no touching of the data, that's sort of your bronze layer. You enrich the data, maybe you cleanse the data, which is kind of your silver layer. And then you've got this enriched governed layer, and I keep going back to the governance where the agents are actually reasoning and acting, which is kind of, again, that real-time agent context, and that really is your gold layer. So this industry is adopting this paradigm of a medallion architecture. And then you've got your, again, agentic systems, whether it's, it could simply be a lot of like queries against the system, right? In the simple kind of, BI world, it can be complex production AI agents. But I would say the ability to develop those pipelines with this stream first approach, CDC, change data capture approach, and this medallion architecture has become so simple. And again, it goes back to the fundamentals of this lakehouse architecture, right? Where essentially there's no real difference, right? Like in the way you architect streaming in terms of the process itself is still similar. And it's kind of powerful, right? Because now you can look at your historical data signals, you've got this concept of time travel. Basically, you can query different snapshots of the data anytime, right? And again, that's where the agents, when you're asking, hey, what changed from the last time, it can actually query the previous version of the data against this new version of the data and surface those insights and actions pretty quickly. So that's how we're thinking about those real-time, pipelines in this world to bring all those data sets together.
Yeah. And it is super. I was just going to add it. I mean, to your point, Vasu, it's super valuable to think about things not as static because they really never are, right? And so you have to build in your thinking around not only continuous monitoring, but how are we going to pick up when things change in the business process, and therefore how you're going to incorporate that into your agent or not, because those things happen, of course, in 100% of cases.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
and it's almost like in this new, kind of in the world we live in right now, like the static. Like that's almost not an option, right? Like I think the businesses they have to move to that real-time system, because otherwise just like just the ability to make money and things like that, like, I think the business would become outdated if it was purely just static signals. So I think the companies do really need to think about reinventing themselves.
Yeah. We are living in an VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So then you can't expect the data to be static when the business is so dynamic and so volatile. Yeah. Okay. Good. So Dan and Vasu, you both have consulted or worked with a lot of other firms. Dan, you are at the Boston Consulting Group, and Vasu, you work with Deloitte and Google. So you bring a lot of experience, especially these days. You are mostly working with financial services. So what are the biggest technical and organizational challenges you guys are seeing in companies implementing AI agents and associated workflows? And what's your advice for companies to handle the non-technical elements, especially the people-related or the process-related aspects?
Vasu, do you want to go first? Or you
yeah, sure. I am happy to go first. I think on this one, I'm sure, Dan, you're seeing this. You work with financial services. I think the regulatory complexity is huge, right? Like I would say the time to starting a conversation, especially with a financial customer like banks and insurance company, to actually deploying something in production, the regulatory complexity, the data residency requirements, I think that is something that we see. And how do you continue to shorten that cycle in order to deliver, the agentic capabilities, I think is a big blocker not blocker, but like an organizational challenge that we see kind of every day. I think the good news is that everybody wants to move fast. So they are looking at ways to kind of reducing this. And a lot of times, mostly banks all have like an MRM, like the model risk management process. Anytime the model changes, they have to go through the whole process again of like, hey, this is an approved model, this is an approved agent, and all that kind of thing, like adds to the time to value or the time to shipping something in the market. The other thing, I personally, when I was at Slalom as well as Deloitte, worked a ton in the data governance space. So this concept of data stewardship was big, right? Like every, kind of data domain needs a data owner, right? Like, and the rules you're defining and, again, how are you actioning on this data, the ownership of that data? It's like a perpetual problem that can never, like, I feel like it was always, it's funny, like every financial institution still faces it, even though it was something that I was working on 10 years ago. Now, if you fast forward and think about it from an, again, still the organizational challenge of the ownership is very distributed. You got the business, you got security teams, you got now AI teams, you got your data governance team, and this concept of an agent product owner, where does that, like who is accountable for the agent lifecycle? And moving things, I think that organizational, again, that people process that you mentioned is kind of huge, right? Because the ownership is so disjointed, and then, compounded to that effect is like the change management. And this is all very new to people. So how do you get the whole organization moving in the same direction? And, again, like I think the inherent trust deficit that companies have with these models. I think those are like, I think we've talked a lot about the technical barriers, right? Like in terms of, governance, data silos, and so on and so forth. But those are some of the organizational challenges that I personally kind of see. But I don't know, Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. And no, I think you hit a number of very good points. I think in particular around kind of like I guess I would say kind of reliable agent-ready data, the governance and audit, which is super important. Maybe just a couple quick ones to add on top of that we see. So right now, like integrations and permissioning for the agent within your application environment is a big one. It will be very. I mean, of course. Agent identity will continue to be very big, but as we move more towards computer use away from maybe integrations over time, as those capabilities get better, it'll just be interesting to see how that evolves. But right now, that's a big challenge. I think that whatever, we can't ignore the context layer, which we've talked about, right? Which is that how do you give the agent a procedure? How do you evaluate the agent and know that it's right for the given at given time X, but also at time X plus 1. And then of course there's the op model, right? How are you going to integrate these agents to work with your talent? How are you going to continue to motivate your talent as their jobs change? So these are many of the challenges. I think we recommend. I mean, we see this as an opportunity for central groups to shine, right? This is where the CIO organization or the transformation organization, they actually get to really centralize and define and actually build the capability as they ship these agents, so that they're ready to take on this new world as we evolve into it in the coming years.
Yeah. Absolutely, Dan and Vasu. So Vasu, when you talk about change management, a thought came to my mind related to Dan's topic on our question on AI debt. So while we are all talking about deploying AI agents, probably I think we should also spend a thought about retiring AI agents after they are kind of expired their lifetime.
Reduce the agent sprawl. I like that.
Okay, I think we are good with time. I'll pass it over to Andrew for the next steps. Andrew?
Terrific. Yeah, thank you all for that great discussion there. We do have some audience questions. I think we only have time for one. So Vasu, I'll ask this of you first, and then Dan and Prashant, if you have anything to chip in with, please do so. So Vasu, I know this has been I believe brought up a couple times here, so I'll just ask you to double click. This person asks, how do you validate that AI agents truly understands a workflow before deploying it at scale?
Yeah, I'd definitely love to hear Dan's thoughts on this one. But, in terms of, I would kind of maybe contextualize it to what we have to offer in this space and how we've thought about it as we are working on deploying AI agents. And I think a big piece of that is the evaluation framework that we have. I would say that's one of the biggest differentiators, is you have to pressure test the systems a lot of times. So think about you building an agent, you define an eval data sets, you maybe run an evaluation, then you kind of have a scorecard, you fix the issue, you reevaluate, and then you have sort of a monitoring capability that's kind of doing it over and over again before you're promoting something to production. So I think having it is more important than ever to think about those evaluation frameworks running against those eval data sets. And also, like, there can be some amount of this, I don't know if it's the right word for it, but like shadow mode, right? Like where, hey, you could run the agents in parallel with how the humans are doing it, seeing how they perform, and kind of beta testing and before they're sort of launched in production. But I think definitely having a strong practical eval framework with measurable metrics before something is deployed is how I would kind of think about that. But I don't know, Dan, if you have anything 100%. Else.
Yeah, and maybe just to add from our end, I think we like to add on top of that, right? Like before getting there, right? How can you expose the agent to hundreds or thousands of examples from the past, and actually measure relative to what was done in the past before. So before anything, the agent's touching anything or even getting into UAT, you have a good corpus of confidence, and then and then sort of beyond that. What was I going to say here? I would say, I guess, beyond that, right? Like, how are you going to continue to observe? What I was going to say was, exactly to your point around promoting the agent, right? We think about it as a spectrum, which is essentially you're starting in QA mode first, then you're going to recommender, then you're going to kind of human in the loop, and then ultimately you're going to autonomous. And so, thinking through based on the decision or the action and the level of risk you're comfortable with, how are you going to promote your agent, through that path, get it into production, and then to your point, what's the kind of continual observability, because as we know, processes change.
Well, that was fantastic. And unfortunately, we are out of time today. So please allow me to thank our speakers. We did hear from Prashant with TDWI, Vasu with Databricks, and Dan with Skan AI. Would also like to thank, again, Databricks and Skan AI for sponsoring today's webinar. And please remember, we did record today's webinar. Please remember, we did record today's webinar. We'll be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation, which you can feel free to share with colleagues. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, you can locate the resource window to download the PDF. And finally, not only does TDWI offer leading-edge team training to advance skills in BI, AI, data governance, strategy, and more, but TDWI now offers team enablement to build in-house capability across your full digital journey. More details will follow in your post-webinar communications. And from all of us here, let me say thank you so much for attending. This does conclude today's event.